Playboy founder who built his empire in Chicago Hugh Hefner dies at 91, some years ago, sitting in his castle-like mansion in the Holmby Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles. Hugh Hefner was telling a visitor about the Halloween party taking place there in a few days. It would be, what? The 7,435th party of Hefner's exceptional, charmed and successful life, a lavish bash for 1,000 or so of his closest and most comely friends. "Now, this is a costume party," said Hefner. "You will have to wear a costume." "I was thinking," said the visitor, "that, with all due respect, I might get some pajamas, a robe, a pipe, slippers and a Pepsi and going as, well." The young Hugh Hefner, the then 73-year-old Hefner, laughed. He gave a sly smile and said, "I'm sorry, that won't work. I'm going as the young Hugh Hefner." Influential and controversial, admired and vilified, and seemingly forever young, the Chicago-born publisher of Playboy magazine and the bunny-emblazoned empire that it spawned, Hugh Marston Hefner died peacefully at home Wednesday from natural causes. He was 91. That life started on April 9, 1926, at Michael Reese Hospital, where he was born the first of the two children. Younger brother Keith was born in 1929. He died in 2016 at 87, of Grace and Glenn Hefner, she a schoolteacher and he an accountant, and both originally from Nebraska. The family lived in Chicago at 1922 N. New England Avenue, in the Galwood neighborhood on the northwest side, where they attended Methodist Church and the children went to Sayre Elementary School. When he was 8 years old, Hugh Hefner started a school newspaper called The Pepper, despite a warning from a concerned teacher that if he continues to waste time on this, he will never amount to anything. "But I was a smart little boy," he told a Tribune reporter in 1999. He attended Steinmetz High School and later recalled, "The best time of my life before Playboy was my last 2 years at Steinmetz. It was a coming-of-age time. It was the first time I went steady. I was a class leader, writing and performing in plays and shows, working on the paper. The things I enjoyed were the things between classes." One of his passions was cartooning, and as a teenager he created a magazine called Shutter and had a Shutter Club for all of his pals. He also started a cartoon autobiography called School Days, which he continued while serving 2 years in the U.S. Army Infantry and later in college. His other early passion was the movies. "There is no way to underestimate the effect movies had on me as a boy," Hefner said. "My dreams came alive at the Montclair Theater on Grand Avenue." He remembered, as a child of the Depression, watching cinematic depictions of the Roaring Twenties, all those images of the Jazz Age, the Flappers, and thinking that I'd miss the party. He would not miss many parties the rest of the way. In 1946, after a brief stint at the Art Institute of Chicago, where he took a summer art course in anatomy, Hefner enrolled at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. By doubling upon classes, he graduated 21 half-years later with a Bachelor of Science degree, majoring in psychology. While at university, he edited the campus humor magazine, Shaft, introducing a feature he called Co-Ed of the Month. He also drew cartoons for the campus newspaper, the Daily Illini. At the time, he began to develop a philosophy that linked freedom of speech and the press with individual rights and a rejection of what he called our legacy of Puritan repression. "For me, journalism isn't just one more profession," Hefner said years later, when donating $500,000 to Intel student fellowships in the university's School of Journalism. "It is one that goes to the heart of democracy." His own professional path began in Chicago with a job as a promotion copywriter for Esquire magazine. When that publication decided to move to New York, Hefner asked for a $5 raise to his $60 a week salary. When it was denied, Hefner decided to stay behind and start his own magazine. He was married by then and a father. He had wed his high school sweetheart, Mildred Williams, in 1949, and they shared their small apartment in Hyde Park with baby daughter Christy, born in 1952. The marriage was not good from the outset. Hefner would later say, "We both had serious doubts before getting married, but I had no other game plan except to get married and, somehow, live happily ever after. But very soon I started becoming afraid that I was turning into my parents. I started to see that happening to my peers. People who were so much fun in high school were going dull. I would walk around looking at the lights of high-rises. I felt like an outsider. I would fantasize about the lives that were going on inside those apartments and wonder whether I would ever be a part of it. He mortgaged his furniture and took out a loan for $600 and borrowed $3,000 from friends and relatives to start Playboy. His initial idea was to start Chicago City magazine, a name he redirected in 1953 when he found he could rent a naked picture of Marilyn Monroe from the Baumgarth Calendar Company for $200, and so Hefner put together the first issue of Playboy on his kitchen table. The first issue had no date because Hefner wasn't sure there would be a second. That first issue came out in December 1953. It was 48 pages with a center spread featuring a nude calendar photo of Monroe. About 70,000 copies were printed, nearly all sold within 2 weeks. The magazine was to be, Hefner said, devoted to subjects I was interested in, the contemporary equivalents of wine, women and song, though not necessarily in that order. Hefner had originally wanted to call his magazine Stag Party, with the stag as its image, but that ran into copyright problems. So Playboy was chosen, and as the magazine's first art director and first employee, local artist Art Paul, recalled, "We'd been talking about animals and we thought of the rabbit, the Playboy of the animal world." It took Paul only about an hour to sketch the famous rabbit head. He intended that it be a quarter-inch high, sort of a friendly sign-off to articles. The second issue of the magazine had the rabbit logo on the cover, as did every issue since in all manner of sizes and variations. It soon became such a recognizable symbol that a letter addressed only with that bunny once made it successfully from California to the company's Chicago headquarters. It is as famous and recognizable as any logo of the 20th century. Something that sits in the collective consciousness of the planet alongside McDonald's Golden Arches, Disney's Mickey Mouse, Apple's Apple or Nike's swoosh. Quickly, the fledgling magazine moved into its first offices, at 11E Superior Street, across the street from Holy Name Cathedral. A company that made kneeling pads was out back. To celebrate the first anniversary of Playboy in 1954. Hefner took his whole staff out to lunch. There were 7 of them and they filled one booth at the Old Charmant's restaurant, at Chicago and Michigan Avenues. "I really wanted to focus on the good life concept, a lifestyle, a point of view we were trying to express," Hefner once said, "and we hit a nerve." The magazine offered a new set of ethical values for an urban society. The message was loud and clear: enjoy yourself. The magazine quickly reached a circulation of 1 million and then 2, 3, topping out eventually at more than 8 million in the early 1960s and spawning magazine racks full of imitators, none nearly as successful. Hefner and his wife divorced in 1959. She got custody of the 2 children, Christy and her younger brother, David, who was born in 1955, remarried and moved to the North Shore. Hefner moved into a 48-room mansion at 1340 N State Parkway, affixed a sign near the door. Translated from the original Latin it said, "If you don't swing, don't ring," and began to cultivate an image and a lifestyle that would define him, his magazine and an era. "Obviously he wasn't a hands-on father," said Christy Hefner, who would as an adult serve as the chairman and chief executive officer of Playboy Enterprises. "But he was a good father. I had my 16th birthday party at the mansion. There was never a period of time when I didn't see him." In the heyday of the Playboy empire, in the 1960s and 1970s, Hefner's life was an open magazine piece. Almost every month, somewhere in the world, a major publication did an analysis of Hefner and the Playboy phenomenon. When Tom Wolfe was inventing new journalism, he made the Playboy Mansion a major stop on his epochal cross-country tour for the Sunday magazine of the New York Herald Tribune. Time magazine accorded its highest laurel, a cover profile, to Hefner in 1967. Hugh Hefner is the prophet of pop hedonism. In that story Time called Hefner the first publisher to see that the sky would not fall and mothers would not march if he published bare bosoms. He realized that the old taboos were going. He took the old-fashioned, shame-thumbed girly magazines, stripped off the plain wrapper, added gloss, class and culture. It proved to be a surefire formula. Millions of words have been written in an attempt to unravel that formula. Among the most intriguing come from Barbara Ehrenreich in her book The Hearts of Men, American Dreams and the Flight from Commitment. The real message of Playboy was not eroticism, but escape, literal escape from the bondage of breadwinning. The images of naked women, she wrote, were necessary not just to sell the magazine, but to protect it. When, in this first issue, Hefner talked about staying in his apartment listening to music and discussing Picasso, there was the Marilyn Monroe centerfold to let you know that there was nothing queer about these urbane and indoor pleasures. And when the articles railed against the responsibilities of marriage, there were the nude torsos to reassure you that the alternative was still within the bounds of heterosexuality. Sex, or Hefner's Pepsi clean version of it, was there to prove that a playboy didn't have to be a husband to be a man. Much of the press coverage of the time was devoted to the Playboy mansion, where Hef holed up for much of the 1960s. Often, visitors found the living room awash in cables of some eager beaver foreign film crews, chattering about Hefner's cutting-edge electronics room or the Wu Grotto behind the downstairs swimming pool. What was off-limits to casual visitors was the tucked-away Roman bath, reached by a narrow stairwell descending from Hefner's bedroom, which featured a round, rotating bed from which, for years, he conducted his share of the business of the magazine, Entertainment Empire. The Roman bath, say several who saw it, included Baroque gold spigots and faucets that sprayed and showered, a tub with chest-high water and, in a separate alcove, a mink-covered waterbed lying under a mirrored ceiling. Among impressed visitors was Italian journalist Toriana Filossi. In a much-quoted essay, she told of what she had found on a trip to Chicago. First of all, the house. He stays in it as a pharaoh in his grave, and so he doesn't notice that the night has ended, the day has begun, a winter passed, and a spring, and a summer, it sought him now. Last time he emerged from the grave was last winter, they say, but he did not like what he saw and returned with great relief 3 days later. The sky was again extinguished beyond the electronic gate, and he sat down again in his grave, 1340 North State Parkway. But, what a grave, boys! In the mid-1960s, friends worried about the near North Side recluse, with irregular sleep habits, whose weight had dropped to 135 pounds, despite a diet built around fried chicken and candy bars. In 1968, he decided to mend his ways, part of a new image called Living Longer. He said, he started to eat wholesome foods, slept more, put on 40 pounds, rethought his wardrobe, bought a DC-9 jet and had it fitted with a James Bond interior and a bunny logo on its upswept tail. By 1971, when Playboy Enterprises went public, the magazine was selling 7 million copies a month. There were 23 Playboy clubs, resorts, hotels and casinos, along with ventures in book publishing, merchandising, modeling, records, TV, movies and a limousine company. The corporation employed 5,000 people, including 1,000 waitresses, dressed in skimpy black silk costumes and known as bunnies. That same year, attracted by the entertainment possibilities of the West Coast, he set up a second residence in Los Angeles, buying a 51-acre estate in Holmby Hills. By 1975, the Chicago mansion was donated to the School of the Art Institute as a student dormitory and later converted into private condominiums. But the company's headquarters remained in Chicago, in 2 locations, in the former Palmolive building and a later space on Lake Shore Drive. After withstanding withering feminist attacks for decades, Hefner and his empire were seriously bruised by a growing conservatism in the 1980s, by the Christian right and by the Mies Commission on Pornography, and by scandal when former playmate Dorothy Stratton was murdered by her husband, and many, including film director and Strat lover Peter Bogdanovich, placed some of the blame on Hefner. The once thriving chain of Playboy clubs and hotels got shabby and empty. Magazine circulation steadily slumped and Playboy lost its lucrative casino licenses. Christy Hefner began to head the company in 1982. She had to fire 100 employees in a drive to cut overhead. Hefner had to sell paintings, a de Kooning and a Jackson Pollock, as well as his airplane, the Big Bunny, to raise cash. These were very dark times, she said. We were in real trouble. In 1985, Hugh Hefner suffered a mild stroke. The following year a Newsweek cover story, "The Party's Over," featured a photo of a haggard Hefner. "This was a period of re-evaluation for my father," Christy Hefner said, "but I think that he never lost his optimism. I was so intimately involved in his decision to change his role in the company, stepping off the board and handing over the titles of chairman and CEO, in 1988, that I understood better than most his need to redefine his life. Along with that business evolution, I felt he really might be open to falling in love and getting married, and so he did." On July 1, 1989, Hefner married for a second time, to Kimberly Conrad, Playboy's 1989 Playmate of the Year. They were married in front of the wishing well on the lawn that fronts the LA mansion. The house and grounds were awash in white, 10,000 white roses and 1,500 yards of white satin. The couple's first son, Marston Glenn, was born 9 months and 1 week later, followed by a second son, Cooper Bradford, in late 1991. Over the next years Conrad attempted to domesticate the mansion. The gang, as some old Hefner pals are known, stopped dropping by. The sign in the steep driveway was changed from Playmates at Play to Children at Play. But she started to feel that Hefner was too controlling, his schedule too regimented. It became for her monotonous. It was she who requested the separation. He later said, "We drifted apart." In those first months after the separation, people would say, "You must be hiding a lot of pain," and I'd tell them that the reality is that the pain came long before the separation. Indeed, he purchased the $7 million house next door to the mansion for her 2 years before the separation was made public. It was at the LA house in the winter of 1999 that Hefner said, "I have to count my blessings." At this age, he was 73, "After all the hits I've taken in business and personally, the last 2 years have been absolutely unbelievable for me." He admitted to having some minor plastic surgery to get rid of the turkey skin on his neck. He felt rejuvenated, reincarnated, whatever the hell it is. For his 70th birthday, daughter Christy had given her father a video filled with photos and movies clips of them together since her childhood. For his 72nd birthday, his doctor gave him a prescription for Viagra. "It's Peter Pan time. I'm living a grown-up version of a boy's dream, turning life into a celebration," Hefner said. "It's all over too quickly. Life should be more than a vale of tears." He was on every important People of the Century list. No publisher, no editor, no cartoonist, no writer can match Hefner's claim that he threw the biggest bomb in the greatest societal revolution in American history, writes F. Richard Ciccone in his book Chicago and the American Century, The 100 Most Significant Chicagoans of the 20th Century. If Hefner did not single-handedly start the sexual revolution, he was its Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson and George Washington combined. That was all very flattering. But what really tickled Hefner was the embrace of some feminists. Camille Paglia has said, "Hefner is one of the principal architects of the modern sexual revolution, and the adulation of a new generation. It's so wonderful to have young kids come up to me in clubs, boys and girls, and say, 'You're the man,'" he said. Those young kids were such celebrities as Leonardo DiCaprio, Cameron Diaz, Ben Stiller and Courtney Love. They, along with such hedonistic loyalists as Robert Culp, Tony Curtis, Robert Blake, James Caan and Jack Nicholson, turned Hefner's Los Angeles mansion back into the most prominent adult playground in the country, his life into a joy. As the new century dawned, Hefner was more visible than he had been in decades. He was named to the Hall of Fame of the American Society of Magazine Editors. He was the subject of 2 documentaries, one a part of the Arts and Entertainment biography series. There was Hefner, Unauthorized, which focuses on the sex and drugs, and the 1975 suicide of Hefner's longtime assistant Bobby Arnstein. In talking to a Tribune reporter about his renewed popularity, he said, "A lot of young people feel that they missed out on the party that was the 60s and 70s. The attitude of the 80s and early 90s was very conservative, socially, politically and sexually. It was a reaction to the freedom and excesses of the 60s and 70s. What's happening now is a counter-reaction, a desire to get into what was a great party. And Hefner was its living, still swinging symbol. Writer Gay Deleuze had called Frank Sinatra the embodiment of the fully emancipated male. But the term is more appropriate for Hefner. The mere mention of his name could evoke all manner of freewheeling images. He emerged from the dark decade of the 1980s and his marriage of the 1990s to discover that he was a white-hot flame, attracting a new wave of swingers, would-be and for real, male and female. Circulation of Playboy, which then stood at about 3.2 million, had risen 65% on college campuses in the last 3 years of the last century. This is a new generation, Hefner said, without the same hang-ups and prejudices that dominated the 1980s. His mansion parties were the hottest ticket in a hot-ticket town. At a Halloween party in 1999, 2 decorative gargoyles perched on the roof of the 10,000 square foot Tudor-style mansion. Tombstones filled much of the lawn area on the home's hilly 51½ acres. Every inch of the property, the sunken tennis court, the pool and its grotto with whirlpools and mattresses, the aviaries, the heavily wooded pathways, was done up for Halloween. There were black and orange tents, a haunted house, hundreds of monster masks hung in the hallways, life-sized monsters and movie stars lounging about. "It's all just Aladdin's castle at Old Riverview Park," said Hefner, referring to Chicago's legendary amusement park. And through it all, Hefner still worked. With the help of 3 women who worked in a guest house at the mansion, part of the mansion staff of 70, he filled the more than 2,400-bound scrapbooks that chronicle, in intimate detail, Hefner's life. "And I am more involved in the magazine in the last 2 years than in a very long time," he said then. "I'm not looking for new worlds to conquer, it's more of the same. The global nature of the business, the internet. This is, I think, the most exciting time for the company since the very beginning." The company was again healthy, revenue up. Christy Hefner was in LA every other month or so for 3 or 4 days at the mansion. Brother David, a computer whiz, lived in Northern California, is an infrequent visitor. "I think of my father more as a partner than a colleague. Of course, I think of him as my dad, not just in biological fact but because we love each other deeply and without reservation. He's also my buddy because he's just a lot of fun. He is Mr. Playboy," she said, adding that her father still set the creative direction for Playboy Enterprises and approved major editorial decisions. "Most of all, he is a living promotion for the brand. That image is essential to the company." That image was most prominently captured in a monthly photo feature in the magazine known informally as Hef Sightings. "We run reader research surveys," Christy Hefner said. "Do you know that the strongest appeal of the Hef Sightings is among those readers 18 to 24 years old?" There were some who believed this fascination with Hefner and Playboy was merely a passing retro phase. A few former lovers and playmates argued that Hefner's public exuberance is masking an empty life. Others claimed he was out and about simply to help try to repolish the Playboy image. "There may be some mixed feelings about what I'm doing," he told a Tribune reporter. "But what my life represents, probably now more than ever before, is the possibilities. There is a lot of pressure to make us put our childhood away. But the boy is not only the father to the man, the boy is the best part of the man. Boyhood is when we dream the best dreams." During the last decade or so, the parties had become fewer, the Hef sightings less frequent. He might make an appearance in a film or TV show, most notably on The Girls Next Door, a reality series that ran for 6 seasons, 2005 to 2009, and 90 episodes. He had a Twitter account. He was married again in 2012, to former playmate Crystal Harris, who was 27. He watched his youngest son, Cooper, become chief creative officer of Playboy Enterprises, which Cooper describes not as a magazine, which it still is, but as a digital content company. In January 2016, the Playboy Mansion was put on the market for $200 million, on condition that Hugh Hefner would continue to work and live in the mansion. And that is where he watched early in 2017 the 10-hour-long episodes of the aptly titled Amazon Studios series American Playboy, The Hugh Hefner Story. Cooper was one of the producers, and the series had his father's stamp of approval. About it Hef said, "This is my story, or at least how I remember it. Hefner is survived by his wife, Crystal, daughter Christy and sons David, Marston and Cooper. Information regarding memorial services was not available. He will be buried in a mausoleum in Westwood Memorial Park, where, in the mid-1990s, Hefner bought the drawer next to that of Marilyn Monroe, his first cover girl, for his final resting place. Hugh Hefner, the ultimate playboy who frolicked through life long enough to become an icon in his own time, died Wednesday night at the age of 91. Playboy Enterprises announced Hefner's death on Twitter at 8:13 p.m. PT and released a statement saying Hefner died at his home of natural causes surrounded by family. Shortly after, Hefner's son Cooper released a statement recalling his father's exceptional and impactful life as a media and cultural pioneer. Even in death, Hef retains his rakish savoir-faire. In 1992, he paid $75,000 to obtain the vault next to Marilyn Monroe, thereby ensuring he could spend eternity with Playboy's first cover girl. Hugh Marston Hefner was the unlikeliest of skin trade revolutionaries. Raised in Chicago under the watchful eyes of conservative parents, a hormonal Hefner quickly found that his average looks could be overcome by a burgeoning talent for cartooning and an innate desire to challenge button-down 1950s conventions. Hefner first learned his way around a magazine as a copywriter for Esquire, but when he was denied a raise there, he sold what little furniture he had and laid the foundation for a publishing empire. In 1953, a time when states could legally ban contraceptives, when the word pregnant was not allowed on I Love Lucy, Hefner published the first issue of Playboy, featuring naked photos of Marilyn Monroe and an editorial promise of humor, sophistication and spice. The Great Depression and World War II were over and America was ready to get undressed. Success came fast and furious for the fledgling publisher, who was both taping into and fueling the counterculture bonfire that raged throughout the 1960s. His Chicago mansion became a hub of outrageous activity, a Parisian salon set in a Roman bathhouse. Although during this period Hefner drew his share of fire from women and men alike, charging he was sexist and amoral, these would prove Hefner's glory years, says Stephen Watts, author of Mr. Playboy, Hugh Hefner and the American Dream. People tend to forget about how truly unique he was in those early days, says Watts, whose 500-page biography paints the portrait of a driven man willing to stop at nothing in order to achieve his vision. He really was a huge cultural figure. His accomplishments ranged from the salacious to the significant. In the former camp, incessant couplings with staffers and playmates alike, most of whom saw the workaholic dressed in his favorite day and night wear, pajamas. In the latter, weighty magazine interviews and features on leading cultural thinkers and the integration of his Playboy clubs at a time when racial tensions were searing. Beyond helping nudity go mainstream, Hefner also ushered in upscale consumerism with gadget reviews that would anticipate by decades magazines such as Gear. The lesser-known fact is that Hefner was as responsible for the consumer revolution as he was the sexual revolution, says Watts. Ever attuned to image, Hefner traded his native Midwest for Los Angeles just as his fame was taking off. In a massive private jet emblazoned with the bunny logo, he bought a Holmby Hills mansion in 1971 for the then outrageous sum of $1 million. By design, the one-time cartoonist was on his way to becoming a caricature. Though no longer needing to work day and night, Hefner was never seen without his pipe and PJs. Both his round bed and his infamous backyard grotto were filled with an endless parade of women, some of whom stayed, Barbie Benton, Carrie Lee, while most vanished, as had his first wife Millie, with whom he'd had 2 children, David and Christy. The mansion became a second home for famous friends, ranging from legends such as Frank Sinatra to whoever was hot in Hollywood at that moment. His parties were infamous, costumed affairs that left little to the X-rated imagination. And then, somewhat abruptly, they went PG. After a stroke in 1985 at age 59, Hefner throttled back on his raucous lifestyle and a few years later handed over the reins of his empire to daughter Christy. In 1989, the dedicated bachelor shocked the world by marrying playmate Kimberly Conrad. The couple soon had 2 sons, Marston, 1990, and Glenn, 1991. The driveway signs at the mansion quickly changed from Playmates at Play to Children at Play. But this detour into traditional family life was not to last. The pair divorced in 1998, with Conrad taking a house nearby and her sons free to wander between their parents' homes. Though proud of his 8 years of fidelity, Hefner seemed happy at his new lease on the wild life. He also was convinced that his second marriage had hurt his reputation as a swinger and had even led to his company's financial struggles. "I'd been off the scene for 8.5 years," he told USA Today in 2005. "When that marriage didn't work in the beginning of 1998, I came back as a bachelor. I think a whole generation had been waiting for me to come out and play." He wasted little time, though in his 70s, Hefner began dating several girls at once, often making the rounds of Hollywood clubs with the harem of blondes. His reality show, The Girls Next Door, only fueled his reputation as a ladies' man. Although he had once before considered then rejected a Hollywood movie on his life, he felt the Tony Curtis vehicle wasn't treated his life seriously. Hefner started to collaborate with producer Brian Grazer on a screenplay about his life. He was hopeful someone boyish would play him. "Johnny Depp is certainly a possibility," he said. "Depp would seem a good choice, having already played one outrageous and iconic writer to crazed perfection." Hunter S. Thompson, the actor, could handle a taboo-shattering Bond villain who only took yes for an answer. Playboy published its first non-nude issue in March 2016 and before that had launched a safe-for-work Playboy Now app. Cooper Hefner announced in February that after one buttoned-up year, Playboy was bringing nude photographs back to its magazine. "I'll be the first to admit that the way in which the magazine portrayed nudity was dated, but removing it entirely was a mistake," he said. Also back for a new generation, the party jokes section in the Playboy Philosophy, a political and cultural column written by Hefner, nearly 40 years after his father last wrote it for the magazine. Hefner spent his last years ensconced in the faux Gothic splendor of his mansion, despite the fact that it sold in August 2016 to Darren Metropoulos, 33, the co-owner of Twinkies maker Hostess. Metropoulos lived next door to the Playboy mansion since 2009, and agreed to buy it with the condition that Hef can remain there to finish out the party that was his quintessentially American life.